Welcome to the Aviation Pros Podcast, the go-to platform for professionals in the aviation industry. Powered by AviationPros.com, the leading source for comprehensive news, insights, and data on airport operations. Whether you're focused on airport management, improvement programs, ground handling, equipment, MRO, or FBO operations, we've got you covered with the expertise and resources you need to stay ahead. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Aviation Pros Podcast. I'm Joe Petrie, Editor-in-Chief for Airport Business. The Colorado Air and Spaceport in Adams County, Colorado is seizing opportunity for demand in the aerospace world while trying to balance the needs of being both a general aviation airport and spaceport. Serving a major airspace region like Colorado provides a lot of exciting opportunities for growth, and leaders there are working to meet demands and build the airport's crucial status in the regional airspace around Denver. I recently spoke with Colorado Air and Spaceport Director Jeff Kloska about the airport's goals and challenges and how he sees the airport and its burgeoning spaceport growing in the next decade. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for speaking with you today. I know you have a lot going on, and it's a lot of busy time for the Colorado Air and Spaceport. Let's start with your recent FAA designation as a national general aviation airport. What does this mean for CAS, both operationally and strategically?
Yeah, so as a quick refresher for the audience, that the FAA, they maintain what they call the NIPIS, National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems. And that's essentially all of the airports in the United States that the FAA considers essential for the operation of the United States air traffic airport aviation system, whatever you want to call it. And all of those airports in there that are identified as part of the NIPIS are eligible for grant funding. And the FAA classifies them upon specific criteria that they have. From the large hub airports, Denver International, O'Hare, JFK, those are considered large hubs. There's medium hubs and small hubs, and even non-hubs, in the commercial world. And within the general aviation world, they classify them in four different levels: basic, local, regional, and national. And the Colorado Air and Spaceport was previously classified as a regional reliever airport, within the NIPIS. So the activities, the operations here were more regional in nature, to keep it simple. Upon the last update that the FAA did, and they update the NIPIS report fairly, every couple of years. And it was at no request of ours that we were upgraded to a national reliever status, which means that just in short, that the operations and the busyness of the airport, has reached a national level. So flights from here are flying, serving, countrywide, and in some cases international markets. And then our level of operations, and our number of base aircraft have reached a threshold that justified that upgrade. And so what that means for us has been, it's a kind of confirmation of what we've been seeing. We have 500 based aircraft. We had over 126,000 operations last year. So that was, what we're seeing in person was reflected, within this newest NIPIS report update.
And how do you see this designation affecting the port's access to federal funding, and how will it shape your capital improvement priorities?
Yeah, great question. So the FAA, so the way, some of the ways they do their grant funding, is dependent upon your classification. So, for example, the last major bipartisan infrastructure bill, there was a chunk of money included in that bill for airports, and that pot of money, the airport got a certain amount dependent on what its classification was. So, so national, we'll just keep this discussion on the general aviation level. So national airports got the highest level. Regional airports got, less than that. And then, local and basic, less and less, dependent on how your classification. So, in some cases, it is directly tied to, funding level of funding. And it also, as we go forward into the future, having that higher classification, supported by the operations and the nature of the business here will justify and support increased levels of grant funding as opposed to if we had remained a regional reliever.
Now, the port has made it clear that it wants to be more than just a traditional airport. What role do you see the Colorado Air and Spaceport playing in the future of aerospace and spaceflight?
Yeah, so the Adams County, within the last decade, back in the 20 teens, had made a visionary decision to proceed with the facility as both a traditional general aviation airport, as well as a horizontal launch spaceport. As we go into the future here, we the county, I say we the county, we fully intend to pursue, both aviation and aerospace. As a general aviation reliever here for the Denver area, where we definitely have a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to supporting aviation within this region. And then there's also incredible opportunity in the aerospace world, as Colorado is consistently in the top, one or two states regarding aerospace jobs per capita, as compared to our population. Us in California and Florida, Texas are some of the higher aerospace states, with aerospace jobs. And I think there's definitely a significant opportunity there, especially with the edge of the universities, within the Denver area, especially CU Boulder and their aerospace engineering, programs. Other universities are, setting up other aerospace programs as well. And even the School of Mines, talks about astro mining, on asteroids and the moon. So Colorado's always been a big aerospace state. It's in its pedigree from the earliest years with NORAD and a number of the Lockheed and Ball Aerospace. Just a lot of those older companies that ecosystem has continued to grow, and that's what we're looking to. We're looking to meet, that growth need, out here at the Air and Spaceport as that, both industries continue to advance.
And that's a great point about the robust industry that is out in that area of the country. And, you obviously have a pretty interesting and unique facility that is able to offer them. From a business attraction standpoint, how is this dual identity as both a general aviation airport and a spaceport influencing the kinds of tenants you're drawing in?
Yeah, so it's been interesting for me. My history was in all of my previous roles were strictly airports. This is my this was my fast forward introduction into aerospace, and I've been loving it, getting up to speed on the spaceport and operators that need spaceports. As far as our facility goes, it's really important for us to pursue both industries equally. We have obviously we have pedigree here of general aviation, with 500 based aircraft and a lot of general aviation that use our facility, especially for flight training. And then, while also, pushing forward our vision of establishing a more of an aerospace ecosystem out here, and that ecosystem may not be launching. We may not launch something, for decades out of here. But what we want to do, for in the time being, is be we want to be realistic. We want to find the niches and find the needs that aerospace needs, rather than trying to force something upon them. We're talking with aerospace to see how we can, support their needs and provide that support. Then on the aviation side of things is continue, aviation's growing, flight training is growing, and as population grows and as countries and cities get bigger and bigger, airplanes and aviation has to support that. So we're going to continue to see growth on the aviation side of things as well. So ensuring that we're properly master planning for both the airport and the spaceport divisions of the business, so that we don't leave one of them behind.
Now, a 2023 economic impact report showed over $200 million in business activity for the airport. What are the driving forces behind that growth, and how do you plan to sustain or scale it?
Yeah, great question. So CDOT, they do that economic impact study every 5 years. It's one of the great things that our great CDOT Aeronautics does here within the state, because it really helps us, and it helps the state tell the story of what aviation is, and how it supports a lot of people in their daily lives, and they may not know that or not, but our that $200 million number, that takes everything into account, from employees out here, people who work for contractors who work on projects, all of the companies that support people out here, the economic multipliers, everything that gets spent by the people that come in and out of here, so it's all encompassing. And our top activities out here, are really flight training. That's one of our big bread and butters. We have a ton of flight training out here, especially as our friends over at Centennial and Rocky Mountain Metro airports are becoming, very, very congested, and they're also fairly landlocked with development around them. Obviously flight training is still occurring, but it's become a little bit more of a challenge for those airports, as they've gotten more congested. Corporate business activities, of course, corporate and business aircraft are our big thing that we handle here with our fixed-based operator. Just your normal recreational flyers, your private owners and folks that maybe own quarters or thirds of planes. We have a lot of just recreational guys out here. Aerospace research is one of our focuses that we're looking to develop and grow out here. With recently we had Boom signed a lease with Boom Supersonic to begin testing and development of their new Symphony engine for their supersonic commercial jet. So we're looking to grow more and more of those type of activities. And then aircraft maintenance. We have a number of aircraft maintenance companies out here, and then some guys even do their own maintenance. So those are kind of the lead lines of business that we do out here.
Considering all those different factors, what kind of aviation and aerospace companies are you targeting as you look to fill out the long-range development plan for the airport?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, we're in a really fortunate position where we have, we're just outside of the metro area. We, as far as the drive time goes, 45 minutes, you can be in downtown Denver. Less than, 35 minutes, you can be in the tech center. Hour and a half, 2 hours, you could be at all the ski resorts. So, anything and everything general aviation, is we definitely have an emphasis on, growing, additional hangars for additional based aircraft. Our doors are open for general aviation growth here. As I mentioned, as other reliever airports within the Denver area are becoming congested, and real estate costs, when you become congested, it's usually the real estate costs are also going up. So, we feel like there's a fantastic opportunity where we can meet the needs of not only, provide a great option, within the Denver region, but also provide for areas of growth, and it could be corporate business jet growth. It could be maintenance and repair operation, like a manufacturer like Gulfstream or Bombardier, or those type of guys. If they needed a large maintenance and repair station, we have space for operations like that. And then on the aerospace side of things, we've been talking a lot with the aerospace industry and to determine, what are the needs, rather than try to guess the needs and try to guess what people need. We've been going out to industry and finding out what people need. And then one of our big exciting things that we've started to work on is a public-private partnership with a group called Altitude X. And as our infrastructure needs are continuing to grow out here, we're reaching a point to where, if we need to think of, really put long-term thought to our need for water, power, even sewer. I mean, any of those utilities that supports long-term growth, and especially if we want to build, and bring in large operators like a Gulfstream or Bombardier, or a large aerospace developer. If you don't have the infrastructure and utilities to support them, then it's always going to be a pie in the sky dream idea. So we're taking the steps now with this P3 agreement that we've entered into. We're currently in a pre-development phase to do assessments and look at utilities and do business planning efforts with the ultimate goal of establishing a master development agreement with Altitude X to begin upgrading infrastructure, begin bringing in, work with us to bring in large operators and to, start to realize that vision of this facility being a major aviation and aerospace, economic engine, on the east side of Denver.
And that brings up to a good point. Can you walk through the phases of your master plan and what stakeholders should know about how it supports Colorado's broader innovation economy?
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting question, and I was trying to figure out how best to answer that because we've gone through so much transition and evolution that this facility has over the last 10 years that during the launch site license process with the FAA, Office of Commercial Space, the airport, the other side of the division of the airport was completing an airport master plan, and then a spaceport master plan was completed, a couple years after that. So, at this point, our airport master plan, from the data and the plan we have, it is old enough now. It was completed in 2019 with 2017 and 2018 data that we're actually at a point now to where we need to look at and update and go through the master planning process again, and really take, combine the airport master plan with the spaceport master plan into a singular document. Because I think the facility, over the years has had a little bit of I don't know if I'd call it an identity crisis, but has been trying to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up, and that we're starting to execute a lot of the items within both of those master plans to ultimately, operate this facility as both an airport and a spaceport. They're very similar to what Houston is doing with Houston Executive. They've as far as all the other airports and spaceport combinations, I would combine us, or I guess I'd closely relate us to how Houston is doing Houston Executive and the Houston Spaceport.
And that's a good thing to bring in that discussion about nationally when it comes to spaceports and this conversation about it, seeing as it's become more of a conversation in the past decade as these start development more. Tell me, I mean, with all the talk nationally about how to better integrate spaceports with the existing infrastructure, what lessons are you learning that might be applying to this whole conversation?
Yeah, I think it's, and then this has been a hot topic, within the spaceports and space world is that there's a on the aerospace side of things, there's a major push for, launch infrastructure and launch resiliency, especially from like the Department of Defense. Right now, there's very, our as a country, our ability to launch rockets into space is ultimately, focused on two federal facilities, Cape Canaveral and then Vandenberg, on the West Coast, and then there's some other spaceports like Wallops in Virginia, and then Kodiak up in Alaska, and who are who are doing a good number of launches, but there's launches out of the Cape and out of Vandenberg, multiple times a week now. It's the cadence is reaching an incredible level that has never been seen before, and I think a lot of the discussion has been, what happens if there's a catastrophic event at either of those two spaceports, that could ultimately cripple the country's ability to, have assured access to space, and that's obviously a huge priority for Space Force, Department of Defense. So, I know that's actively being looked at, but just like I really akin airports. The way that spaceports are now are like the way airports were, 100 years ago. New disruptive technology. People weren't flying before that. People were moving at the speed of, horses in many cases. And the airport industry, when it began, aviation and airports had to be fostered and had to be supported to a point to when to eventually to where it could be self-sustaining, based off of fees from its own operators and its as an industry. But that took decades, decades and decades for that industry to mature. And over the last 100+ years, since the Wright brothers, took their first flight, that that's how we've been able to achieve such a safe and efficient and highly effective operational system within the United States. That to me, that same the way that airports have evolved over the last 100 years is how a spaceport should be approached. The spaceports are expensive, to set up infrastructure and launch operations and all the things that rockets and horizontal launch vehicles need is incredibly expensive. And I think we're at that point now to where the industry knows we need more spaceports and we need more support facilities, but then who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be local government? Is there going to be federal involvement? So that's what I think the industry, commercial spaceports, it's figuring that out now on, okay, it can't just be done locally. There's going to have to be some federal support, because especially if the United States, needs launch resiliency, and there's a federal, a strategic need for that. So there's some of our legislative priorities have been pushing for federal support for like space launch infrastructure or an infrastructure to support space launch at commercial spaceports, because right now there isn't one. So there is a grant program called the STEM grant. It's a Space Transportation Infrastructure Matching Grant Program. It's that program has existed for a couple decades now. However, it's only been actually funded sporadically, and that's been a priority for, I know, not only us but a number of other commercial spaceports, to actually get money appropriated and get that program refunded so that states and counties, cities, municipalities, other looking to establish commercial spaceports can begin utilizing a federal program to build up that infrastructure.
So with these spaceflight capabilities still evolving in the U.S., what kind of regulatory or policy changes would help accelerate your vision?
Yeah, so obviously, over the last couple of months, it's been a very fluid dynamic, coming out of DC. But some of the more encouraging things that we've been seeing, from an aerospace spaceport side of things is definitely the direction of the current administration wanting to deregulate certain things, either certain FAA processes or certain NEPA processes, or things like getting a launch license, from like the operators who are currently launching. There's it's a fairly extensive approval process, as you can imagine. Um, but I think there's definitely an industry push for, hey, how can the FAA, how can the Office of Commercial Space streamline those processes? What can we do as the federal government to make this process easier? Because that's definitely been a push coming from commercial aerospace, is efficiency and being able to get things through the approval processes a bit quicker, on those side of things. So some of that deregulatory agenda is definitely something we're keeping our eye on, and we're actively providing comments to the federal government and to the FAA Office of Commercial Space. They've put out some requests for comments on that type of deregulatory agenda and what the industry would like to see. So we're making sure that we make our voices heard with that.
You're working with a lot of regional partners out there. Tell me, how are you working with them to support workforce, infrastructure, and other long-term developments for the spaceport?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our priorities that we have within Adams County, and specifically there in Spaceport, is workforce STEM outreach. Not just supporting aviation and aerospace, growth, as an industry, but that same growth, comes with a cost. It needs to be supported by a workforce. So we are definitely very keenly aware of that, and have prioritized STEM outreach, engagement with all of our local school districts, and then engagement with the major universities here in Colorado to be involved with them and to help with not only getting the younger generations interested in aviation and aerospace, but actually taking meaningful steps to either mentor or to speak at career days, to go to universities and be part of the Colorado Space Business Roundtable or Colorado Space Coalition, and get the word out on internships, and make meaningful advancements with that, from the youngest ages, and then all the way through initial career fields. Because as the story we like to tell is that it's not all rocket scientists in aerospace. That there's a lot of highly technical, skilled laborers, welders, that and sheet metal people, fiber and composite materials that are incredibly essential and important to aerospace and the aerospace world. So that telling kids that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be in aerospace. There's so many other things you can do, either 2-year degrees or 4-year degrees, or even just, welding and blue collar type of certifications that aerospace companies need, but sometimes the workforce isn't there because they've been guided down a different route of, you go get your 4-year degree, and, you get certifications, and then try to become a scientist, which is unnecessary, unless that is what someone wants to do. Then it's more power to them, So, but as a whole, I think just we partner with anyone and everyone we can, on the educational standpoint, and then with our regional partners like Denver, and all of our neighboring counties and cities, and we have a close relationship with the state of Colorado and their Office of Economic Trade and International Development. Because as Colorado's only, we're the only horizontal launch. Well, we'll just say only spaceport Colorado has. That we want Colorado, Denver, and the region to use us as a support mechanism. Use us as a resource. When it comes to the overall economic growth and development of Colorado.
That's an interesting point on there. What kind of challenges do you face in educating the public and the industry, as a matter of fact, when it comes to what the Colorado Air and Spaceport is and what it's becoming?
Yeah, that's a great question because it can be challenging at times to explain, that we're an airport and a spaceport. That those things don't have to be completely separate. You can be both. Honestly, most of the horizontal launch spaceports are also fully operational airports. Mojave, us, you know, a number, Cecil. I'm leaving a bunch off, but that we're all fully operational, airports. So, I think the key is just to make sure that we're continuing to stay out there. And one of our big jobs that we do out here is just educating elected officials, educating our congressional representatives at both here in the state and in DC, and then educating the general public, because we have a lot of support out here and around us here. But yeah, I think as CAS continues to grow, I think it's if we can get out ahead of the education process with our surrounding communities and within the region, we can head off some of the issues that a lot of airports run into with not so much congestion occurs, but as development moves out, development inherently creates can create conflicts. I think if you look at Centennial and Rocky Mountain Metro, they've done great jobs at those airports to do what they can to manage development, around the airport, but you're not always successful. And then, in many cases, an adjacent municipality or an adjacent group can decide to take your input and proceed with building homes anyways, and those homes could be right in the approach path for your runway. So, some of the active steps we've taken here at the Air and Spaceport, definitely learning from others' mistakes who've developed before us, has been to develop a sub-area master plan around the Air and Spaceport that really identifies what makes sense from a land use perspective and zoning perspective around the airport. What are compatible land uses? How should the areas around the Air and Spaceport be zoned so we can prevent those historical missteps that other facilities have seen, and not at any fault of their own, but you can do what you can to control the property you own and operate, but others who own property in other jurisdictions around your facility don't have to do what you ask them. They can take it under advisement and do something the opposite.
With all the big plans that are underway and things you're looking for, what kind of capital investments are you currently planning or sought for the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so some of our biggest needs that I've observed, out here since I've been here, and that are working with my team on, really has focused around equipment, just some of our snow and ice equipment that's just been older, and we've got a lot of older equipment from Denver International as they've sold off some of their equipment that they don't need. And then so snow and ice equipment, just equipment in general for like FBO and for the ops and maintenance team. And then really for the airfield, it's really been focused on just pavement. we have a lot of pavement out here, and it's all used pavement. But asphalt out here, it has a specific lifespan, so we've been focusing, obviously, we have to work with the, FAA on grant funding and project justification. So, runways and taxiways and, public use taxiways and all the taxi lanes that support, our operation here. And then, stormwater is definitely a need, some priorities we've been discussing, just as this whole area has inherently been, fairly rural and a lot of, pervious surface that as we develop and as some of the larger developments around us build out, that there's going to be a lot more impervious surface, which is going to, just exacerbate our current stormwater infrastructure. So that's other stuff that we're starting to think of now, so we can be ahead of it, for when the time comes.
Now, looking ahead over the next 10 to 20 years, what's your biggest hope for the Colorado Aerospace Port and how it'll impact the future of aviation and aerospace in the region and globally?
Well, my biggest hope for this facility is that we can continue to grow and make the improvements necessary, with infrastructure to allow that growth to occur. As I mentioned, we have a ton of space out here to continue meeting the needs for aviation and aerospace for decades and decades and decades to come. As opposed to some of our more mature friends at, Rocky Mountain Metro and Centennial, who will, get built out at some point, and that they'll be locked in. That will be the next, I would consider us the next big domino to fall, as far as growth of general aviation in the Denver area. And, and then also, being able to support the flight training and support the needs of the aviation world, because as we all know, pilots are, being harder and harder to come by. So pilots, mechanics, supporting the workforce for all of those industries, and then supporting those industries as a whole is something we want to do. And then, I think our vision here within Adams County near in Spaceport for the aerospace, for the Spaceport side of the business, is for this facility to develop, research and development, testing, payload processing, mission control, as time goes on, to build out an ecosystem of aerospace out here, as time goes on, to eventually be a major, location where aerospace wants to be, given our location, adjacent to the Denver area here, and all of the educational universities and support that they would have that already exists. So we want to be, an airport, and we want to be a spaceport, and we're gonna continue to give both the attention that they need going forward.
Jeff, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Very exciting future for the airport and the spaceport. I can't wait to see where things go over the next few years, and I'm really excited to see such the progress you and your team are able to make.
Yeah, no, Joey, I sure appreciate your time today. It was great talking with you, and I hope the audience can come away with this with some better knowledge and better understanding of the Colorado Air and Spaceport, because as we're trying to do, we're trying to make sure our name is out there and make sure people are aware of us and can tell their friends.
Thanks for tuning in to the Aviation Pros Podcast. Stay ahead in airport operations and leadership by subscribing to our Airport Business Daily Newsletter, your go-to source for the latest industry insights. And don't forget to explore even more at AviationPros.com, the home of exclusive content for aviation professionals like you. I'm Joe Petrie. We'll catch you next time.